Hello, welcome to Module 6 of Phase 1 of the Volunteer Training Modules for the Wildlife Center of the North Coast. This is the final training module in Phase 1. So from this point forward, there are more complex things to learn, but perhaps not quite as much in terms of volume. So future training phases, Phase 2 and Phase 3, will hopefully not involve quite so many videos and slideshows and things. So today we're going to be talking about reading whiteboards and interpreting abbreviations and clinic speak, some of the basics of bird handling. So bird handling, essentially that is non-raptors at this point, and then a little bit of information about weight checks. All right, let's get started. Okay, so as anybody will have noticed when taking a tour through the clinic or spending time in the clinic, there are whiteboards in a couple of different locations that we use kind of as cheat sheets to let us know what's happening with the different patients in different locations at any given time. We talked in an earlier training module about the kitchen whiteboard, which we use for keeping track of patient diets. And today I just want to kind of briefly take a look at the kind of master whiteboard that is in the clinic itself in the main cage room that gives an overall picture of each of the patients in care and what their sort of care program looks like overall. So when you look at these whiteboards, they can be a little bit intimidating or overwhelming at first because there are a lot of abbreviations and acronyms, and sometimes if we've had to cross things out and write things over, it can be a little bit difficult just to kind of even see what's there. But with a little bit of experience and a little bit of knowledge about what some of those abbreviations are, it's actually it gets to be pretty easy to know what you're looking at. So one thing you'll see is next to the whiteboard in the clinic area, and then also in a few other places around the clinic, like on the back of the small clipboards that hang across from the swim sinks, I have made these little abbreviation reference guides, basically, of the most common abbreviations that we use. And you can use those to help you if you ever find that you're looking at something and you're just not sure what it means. So these are the most common abbreviations you're going to see, and you will see them enough that before you know it, you'll start to be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. So you can always feel free to grab one of those small clipboards when you're working a clinic shift to carry around with you if you think that you're going to want to use it for reference. And here on the left side of this slide, you can also see what some of those things are. So for example, BID, twice a day. You'll see RADS is something you'll see a lot on the board, which means we're taking a patient for x-rays. The different feeding abbreviations like HF for hand feed, FF for force feed, that kind of thing. So basically, these are the initials, abbreviations, acronyms, whatever you want to call them, that you're going to see the most often. And if you kind of get a handle on this list of things, you're probably going to be able to read most of what's on the whiteboard. So let's give it a little try here. So here on this slide, we have a list of animals in care. And this looks like I probably took this picture last summer when things were, fairly busy and crowded. And I put a blue box here around the patient that was being housed in A7. So you can see there inside the blue box, it says A7 in the column under location. Then next to that, it says COMU, which I have come to learn from being here a long time, means common myrrh. So like we talked about, I think probably in one of the earlier slideshows, abbreviations are typically for animals going to be the first two initials of the first word in the animal name and the first two letters of the second word in the animal name. And that's not always true, but it's true often enough to give you a good start. And then next to that, next to where it has the COMU for common myrrh, it says I, like, EYEI. And then INFXN, which is just sort of shorthand for eye infection. Under the column that's to the right of that, it says next steps in treatment plan. So if you look down that column to where the row we're looking, it says on whole fish, antibiotics for 7 days. So ABX, if you can make that out there, that means antibiotics. It also looks like both this common murre and the one above it in A4 were dealing with some parasites, because it says rid parasites with an arrow. The next column over, if you look up above, says recheck/labs due, and it has an 8/2. So meaning that on August 2nd, this would be due for labs recheck, which means in this case, since they're trying to deal with some parasites and things, it would probably be like a fecal test to make sure that whatever those parasites were that they saw initially are no longer there. And the next few columns here are diet and nutrition, housing setup, and enrichment. You can see there's arrows in those rows, and that means that you can look up above. Since the patient in A4 is also a common murre, they have similar diet and nutrition and housing setup. So I see for diet nutrition, it looks like it's eating whole herring. And for housing, it looks like we're just wanting to make sure people know to give it a haul out with those towels for bumpers so it doesn't get its feet stuck between the haul out and the side of the cage. Okay, so now that we've done sort of a brief overview of reading the whiteboard, again, that's just something that the more you do it, the more you'll be familiar with what's on there, the more you'll get comfortable with what's on there, and you'll find that you have a better understanding of what it's trying to tell you. So it's really just, this overview was to give you just some confidence that it's not just all gibberish, and that you're going to get to a place where you not only understand it, but can use it to guide you during your shift. And it's just going to be all about, familiarity and practice. So now that we've talked about that a little bit, I'd like to talk a little bit about the basics of bird handling. And this is going to be the non-raptor edition. So we'll talk about handling raptors in a future slideshow, since that is a skill that usually comes a little bit later in volunteer training, since it is more intimidating for most people and requires a little bit more confidence around the animals. So the first thing to say is no matter what kind of bird you're handling, you always want to make sure you know where its head is at, and you want to keep yourself protected from beaks and sharp feet, right? So even, cute little guys with, don't have talons and don't seem nearly as, quote unquote, dangerous as an eagle or an owl, their beaks are still sharp, and some of them still have, sharp nails on their feet and that kind of thing, and you just want to be careful. You also want to make sure you're using the right size towel, sheet, or pillowcase for the bird that you're handling. If you end up, with a small bird inside a giant towel, you're going to find it really unwieldy. It's not particularly safe for the animal, and it can just make everything you're doing more difficult. So it's going to be a lot easier to know where the various parts of the bird that you're handling are if you've got the right size material covering it, and it's going to make it easier to access those parts for any treatments, right? So if you are helping with an exam on an animal, you've got a small bird with just like a hand towel or a pillowcase over it, it's much easier than for you or the rehabber to access, say, one wing at a time or one leg at a time without the bird having to be totally uncovered and spending that time, staring at our scary human faces. All right, so here we are going to watch a quick video of how to take a bird out of its enclosure safely.
We're just going to narrate over this.
You'll notice that Ginger's opening the cage really carefully. We knew that this particular breed had a habit of sitting really close to the door, so we wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to fall out. Immediately putting one hand to get control of the head, covering it gently, and then once it's covered, one hand on the head to make sure that the head and the beak stay covered, especially since grebes do have a really sharp beak. Gently but pretty thoroughly wrapping it up and removing it from the cage. So you'll notice that in doing this, Ginger is working slowly but with confidence, is keeping the environment around the animal really quiet so as not to cause it any additional stress, and that at all times Ginger knows where the head and beak of the animal are, and is also able to having used like the right size material for the job, is able to cover the entire animal. Okay. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in this particular module is kind of the corollary to hey, we're taking this bird out of the cage, which is that a lot of times when we're doing that, it's because we're going to do something like a weight check. Weight checks are one of those things that I think you learn by doing a lot of the time, but I did want to give some sort of basic guidance and parameters. So, again, choosing a towel or other fabric covering for the animal that's big enough to completely cover it while it's being weighed is tremendously helpful for a lot of reasons. In this case, one of the biggest things is you're going to be setting the patient on the scale and needing to remove your hands from the scale in order to get an accurate weight. And so you would really, like to avoid unintended escape. So if the animal is really well covered in whatever fabric covering you're using, that's going to minimize its ability to shake the fabric off and get loose. I personally am the worst at remembering to do this, which is why I made sure to include it here, which is that you want to make sure you weigh the towel or the pillowcase or the sheet, whatever you're using, weigh that first before you weigh the animal, because you want to make sure you're getting an accurate weight. And if you weigh the animal and the towel or the pillowcase together, what you're getting is the weight of the animal plus the fabric. So when you are getting ready to weigh the animal, first turn on the scale, put the towel, pillowcase, whatever it might be on the scale, press the tare button, and then you can remove the fabric, use it to cover the animal and remove it from the cage, weigh the animal, and you'll get an accurate weight. Write down the weight as soon as you take it. So, maybe some people have better memories than I do. I think that's highly likely. But it's super easy to forget, especially when it gets busy in here. So I have found myself on more than one occasion, I weigh an animal and I think to myself, I know that was, 654 grams, and I can remember that and I'll write it down in a second, and then I immediately forget. So write down the weight as soon as you take it. And that way you minimize the risk of forgetting what it was and needing to bother the animal again to get an accurate. And that's it for Module 6 here of Phase 1. So I'm hoping that through these, 6 module slideshow presentation things with me talking at you, that you've had a chance to learn enough of the basics that when you come here for a shift and you're working in the clinic, it doesn't feel particularly overwhelming, or at least you feel like you have some sense of where to begin and some background, some visuals that will help you in learning how to put these things into practice and just get more comfortable as a volunteer here in the clinic.